Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. I have a good friend of mine from way back in the day joining us today, Matt Warner, who works in organizational management with a variety of different companies. And we're going to talk today around just the health of organizations and why some of that the healthiness gets overlooked, and around the cohesion of good and healthy teams. So thanks so much today for joining me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this. This will be fun. And it's kind of a flashback to younger years.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah.
So if you want to just give us a layout of kind of what you're doing with companies today, what you're seeing as trends for the small businesses.
Yeah. So I help CEOs or executives or leaders of teams transform their organizations primarily through team cohesion and then organizational clarity. And what I've noticed with most teams, and it's totally fair, even with small businesses, is that what can often happen is if you're not careful, you downplay how significant healthy is, or you downplay how important it is that the team really is united, or the word we use is cohesive. And that's okay, because there's so much to do and there's so many things to do in a day, and we get so focused on the tasks that we'll tend to downplay how healthy are we and how united, or how strong is our cohesion. Those often get overlooked, or they're not prioritized.
Right. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think we tend to, in our culture, focus more on the smart side. In fact, this is kind of how we describe it. So high performing cultures tend to get really good at two things. The first one is that they're good on the smart side. So these are the things you went to school for. These are the things that your title might be in. And every organization, usually the ones that are high performing, are really good on the smart stuff. So it could be finance, strategy, technology, all those things. And they have to be good. It's kind of like Apple. Apple's never going to say like, hey, the phone's good enough, we can coast. They're always pushing themselves on that smart side, so to speak. They always want to get better. But that's only one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is high performing cultures are healthy. Now, when we say healthy, it's easy to be like, oh, yeah, I get that. But what that really means is that they're good at minimizing a few things. And the first one is minimizing politics. Now, a lot of times people go, oh, no, we don't have politics in our organization. We're fine. Our team is great, blah, blah, blah. And that could be true. There could be a lot of strong qualities on that team or that organization. But most of the time, if you ask enough questions to an organization or a team, they'll say, yeah, there's some politics going on. So usually when I work with a team, I'll say, well, give me an example of politics. So maybe you can give me one. Give me an example.
Gosh. I feel like there's so many different ones out there and we could talk to, but I think a lot of them is some of those favoritisms to, certain people in the organization that maybe don't do much work, but they're in with the managers or in with the owner. Yeah.
That's a great example. So the definition we use, though, that's great, is politics is anytime you say something or don't say something, or anytime you do something or don't do something to manipulate or control a situation or a conversation. And so what can often happen on teams or organizations that don't prioritize healthy is that politics can run rampant. So healthy organizations are good at driving that down as best they can. The other thing they're really good at is driving down confusion. So what's an example of things that can be confusing with the companies or the people you work with, Christy?
I mean, a lot of it is I've seen with just, nobody's communicating clearly. You find out of things afterwards, or there's a certain group of people that know something that the rest don't know quite yet. Yeah.
Sometimes it can be even as simple as, sometimes it's not always clear in every organization, what is the top thing that my boss wants me to make sure that I have fully execute on it this week or the next 2 months or 3 months. Sometimes that's not always clear. So healthy organizations are really good at driving confusion down. And so what happens is, when there's lots of politics and lots of confusion, and I'm going like this because I'm used to my diagram, but I explain this, is is there's usually morale starts to get impacted. So people aren't bringing the same energy to work, and then productivity starts to get impacted. And so what that often means is people are quietly quitting, or they're still going to work, but it's not nearly the energy that they used to have. And then when a lot of that is going on, then there's often turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had to guess, when there's a lot of politics and a lot of confusion, who do you think are the first to go?
It's usually your best people.
Yes, it usually is. And here's why. Because they're usually pretty good at spotting the politics pretty early on. And then because they're high performers, they're usually pretty well networked. And so other opportunities will come up just naturally. And if there's a lot of politics and a lot of confusion, if it's not healthy, they'll go, you know what? I think I'd rather go somewhere where this doesn't feel like this. And so they'll go somewhere else. Now, of course, sometimes people will leave and it may have nothing to do with like politics or confusion or being unhealthy. But high performing organizations, even small businesses, are really good at figuring out, what do we need to do to get healthier? And they lean into that. They don't avoid it. They don't sweep it under the rug. And it's an honest conversation that they'll have with each other in that small business or in a big organization. And what can often happen though in organizations is the smart side, those are called the hard skills, and the soft side, the healthy side is called the soft skills, which is code sometimes for what?
You got some empathy, and you got more than just like your day-to-day skills in there. You're actually looking, you're perceiving what's going on, watching all of that. Yeah.
And sometimes it's code for the hard and soft skills is also code for one is more important than the other sometimes in certain organizations. But the reality is if you're healthy, it actually makes you smarter over time. And this often gets missed in small businesses and organizations, is because when you're healthy, you'll figure out where the gap is. You'll have the honest conversation. You'll figure out what's not working. Even if that conversation is awkward, even if it's painful, you'll lean into figuring out, hey, why isn't this working? Why aren't we working at the rate or at the speed or at the effectiveness as we thought we would? You'll lean into those conversations versus what can happen in a lot of organizations is you're just having all these other conversations with other people not in the room, and you're not really getting to the real issue. And so if you're healthy, it actually makes you smarter over time, which sometimes people, they hear that and they're like, oh, I don't know about that. But I've seen it over and over again. It makes up for all the areas that you're not strong in. If you're healthy, you'll get to the solution a lot quicker.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. I think, and I think that's too, nobody really talks about that either. And interesting enough, earlier in the week, there was a guy on LinkedIn that made a post around what type of CEO would you want? The one that's the driver that's pushing you, kind of like the Elon Musk, or do you want a CEO that's just empathy and doesn't really push? And my comment back to him was, you need to have somebody that has a combination of both of those skills. They need to know when to push, but they also need to know when to sit on the sideline and listen to what their employees are telling them and be able to meet them where they are.
Exactly. And a great example of healthy is when the leader can admit, I was wrong, I made a mistake, or I need help, or I'm open to your feedback because I got blind spots. When the leader acts like they have it all together, that they don't have anything that they need to work on, that's usually not the sign of a healthy organization. And that sometimes is the hardest for the leader, is to admit that sometimes other people in the room have the better answer, or they might know better in that situation. But healthy leaders, healthy organizations, they establish a culture where that is okay.
Yeah. Have you seen it where companies start out very healthy and the owner may lose sight of where the company's going? Like total vision has been lost, and then it just starts to well up inside, like kind of toxicity, mass chaos, and all of that. It's like the ship's going in every direction except where it should be going. And how have you seen or even talked to some of these leaders of how do they pull that back in and make their company what it was when maybe they first started years and decades ago?
Yeah, that can easily happen. Yeah, and Patrick Lencioni, who I use a lot of his material, he talks about how companies need to get really good at what are called, like he calls the 6 critical questions, and these are kind of foundational to make sure that an organization doesn't steer too far away from where they want to go, and so one of those is like, well, what do we do? Like, and then how do we succeed? And so the how we succeed and what do we do, those can be really helpful, because if you're really clear on this is how we succeed, then you can use those as your filters or your strategic lenses for any big decisions or any big new seasons that come to the organization or the small business. So a classic example, this is a fun one. Years ago, this is a fun story about Southwest. Years ago, somebody wrote an email to the CEO of Southwest saying they were really unhappy with the joke that was used before the flight took off. And the CEO at the time wrote a 1 email response back. And the one sentence response back. It was, "You'll be missed." And sometimes people hear that and go, wow, that's really bad customer service, or I can't believe they did that. But for the CEO, it was really clear. Their humor is one of the differentiators of their culture. In fact, it's what makes them very unique from all the other airlines. And so the CEO is not going to be apologetic about the humor and the jokes, because that's what they do. That's part of their culture. That's how they succeed. They've defined that clearly for themselves. And so that can really help organizations or even small businesses, is like, hey, what does this look like for us to succeed? So that, 2 years from now or 3 years from now, we are really clear and we don't wander too far away from that. So maybe to answer your question, that could be one way, is making sure everyone's on the same page with that, especially the leader. But the other thing too that can really help is, and this is a big part of the work that I do, is making sure that the executive team, or in this case, it could be any team really, but the executive team is really united and has cohesion. And that really comes down to 5 behaviors. And the first one, and this is the one that's the most important, but it sounds so like kumbaya-ish, that sometimes leaders hear this and they go, well, we're fine, we don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
But the first behavior is trust. And it's not predictive trust, like, oh, I know Christy, she's great, send her the offer, we don't need to call her references. That's predictive trust. But the part of trust that healthy organizations, small business have, is called vulnerability-based trust. And this is where you say what needs to be said in the moment. So the hard thing, maybe the scary thing, maybe the dangerous thing, you go there, versus politics, where we just don't say what really needs to be said. So that you have vulnerability-based trust on your team if you can hear things like, I made a mistake, or I'm wrong, or I'm glad you spoke up because your idea is better than mine, or hey, you're really good at that, and can you show me how you do that, because I know that's more my job, but I really admire that about you. Or hey, I crossed the line there, I said that with way too much of an edge, I apologize. When you hear things like that, then you know that you've got vulnerability-based trust. And now that sounds maybe like very basic, but it's so important, because if you don't have that, the next behavior is healthy conflict. But if you don't have that ability to be vulnerable and to admit when you're wrong, or you made a mistake, or that someone else's idea is better, then you're not going to have healthy conflict. So that's the foundation, but it is so important.
And I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Even you gave the example of you pull everybody into a boardroom and they're like, hey, do you have anything to say? And in their thumbs, nah, it's all good. And you got a dumpster fire going on in the background. Yes. And then that one guy at the end finally is like, yeah, actually it's terrible. And everybody else is like, yeah, I totally agree with you. But again, comes back to, do you have that vulnerability of trust in the room to be able to actually say what you need to say, and not that you're going to be fired or your boss is going to yell at you or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. You can't fix problems if it's not safe enough in the room to talk about the real problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, that ability to say what we really need to talk about, and like you said, where it's safe enough. This is so important. And the other reason why this vulnerability-based trust is so really important is because every single person struggles with a human tendency called the fundamental attribution error. And this is where we make judgments about someone else's character or their intent, oftentimes not knowing the backstory, oftentimes not knowing the person that well, but we make assumptions about them. The easiest way to illustrate this is when someone cuts you off on the freeway, you immediately have a lot of thoughts about them. They're reckless, they're a narcissist, they're self-absorbed, they're the kind of person that would kick puppies. I mean, all sorts of things, right? You have a hand motion that go with it often for some people. If we cut someone off on the freeway and they respond poorly to us, our response is like, sorry, I didn't see you. You're my blind spot, or I'm in a hurry, or wow, you need to take an anger management class. We have all these different thoughts, right? Very differently than when we think about someone else's character or their intent. And so if you're not careful, this can happen in work environments too, where someone shows up late to a meeting and you're like, man, I wish they were more organized. I wish they had like more control over their schedule. They're so aloof, or they're not bought in. We come up with all these, thoughts. But if you show up late to a meeting, all of a sudden it's like, man, if you had my life, you'd be late too, right? We have all these, if so, the way that you keep the fundamental attribution error from happening, even on small teams or on small business, is that you're constantly getting to know people that you work with. You constantly find out what they love, what excites them, what they're hopeful for, what they've overcome in their life. The more you get to know someone, the more you're going to have that ability to fight the fundamental attribution error. And this again helps with that real trust, because if you get to know the other person you work with, and I'm guilty of this too. I've been on teams where I'm like, I don't even know half the people I work with, their spouses' names. And it's like, I don't know them all that well. And so this is easy to talk about, but sometimes it's hard to do. In fact, the majority of what I do with teams, everyone understands it, but it's hard to do.
It is, because and I think too, people have kind of moved away from knowing who people are as well. Yeah. And I would say, even growing up, being in the family business, my grandpa made this such a priority. He knew every employee. He knew their spouses. He knew their kids. He knew what they liked, what they did. And he always took time to sit with them and want to know who they were. And you see how that paid out in dividends later on, of just this trust in people that wanted to work for him. And when you had to have hard conversations, there was a level of respect because they knew one another.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have that trust, the next behavior is healthy conflict. And the reason why it's so important is because if you have conflict without trust, then what's going to happen is you're really probably going to have people that are just kind of politicking again, kind of fighting to get their answer or their version to be right. But if you can have conflict with trust, then you have people getting after the truth, or the real problem, or solving it. So it's really important. If you and I have a disagreement, or we have a different way of, let's say, solving a problem, but at the end of the day, you don't really trust me, it's going to be really hard for you to hear, Christy, my thoughts without kind of getting maybe a little defensive or wanting to push back. But if we have an ability to be vulnerable with each other, to be real with each other, where it's safe enough, our conflict or our disagreement will be a lot quicker and easier because we have that trust.
Yeah.
So when we talk about conflict, a lot of times this can be a scary word for people because, well, if your family of origin didn't handle it well, then it's a really scary word.
Yeah.
It's really about having positive ideological conflict. So this is really just mostly conflict around ideas. Sometimes it can be personal, but it's mostly around ideas. So can you get all the ideas on the table? Good ideas, bad ideas, half-baked ideas, creative ideas. Can you get all the ideas on the table? Because if you can get all of them out there, it's going to lead to a great discussion, and great discussions often lead to great decisions. So high-performing teams, small businesses, big organizations, they have the ability to push back, even have a passionate debate around ideas, and they normalize it. Hey, this doesn't have to be personal. I'm not attacking you just because I see something different or I have a different opinion. We can spar over ideas and it not have to be a big deal. That's sometimes where, like, even teams that think they're great, they often are not having enough conflict around ideas. And that actually can sound like, well, that doesn't sound healthy. It actually is very healthy. In fact, you know that your team has a certain level of healthy and trust among each other if you can have meetings somewhat on a regular basis where there is a little bit of conflict around ideas. If your team is never disagreeing with each other, if there's never conflict in your staff meetings ever, then it probably means you're not talking about what matters most. And I've seen this on teams where it's like there's a direction we're going, or there's a vision that doesn't seem to be totally working, and nobody's addressing it or talking about it. That's usually a team that needs to push themselves to have more conflict. And usually the reason why that's not happening is there's probably not enough trust established on the team that we can talk about different opinions and it not become a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen it in family-owned businesses that the conflict is probably a lot easier because they all know each other, but then it gets heated in a different way? Because I've had multiple clients over the years that are family-owned businesses, and there's sometimes I have to just hit mute on the call. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna let you fight for a while, and then we'll come back into this, and it's nothing ever gets resolved because now this conflict is coming from different parts of why they're even fighting, and it's probably more personal than it is business, but it gets brought into the room.
Oh, I can only imagine how difficult that could be, because sometimes it's really hard to separate a family dynamic, and then have that not creep in the middle of a conflict or in the middle of a discussion or debate. I could see that being very challenging. We all want to pride ourselves of like, oh no, that doesn't impact me.
Yeah.
But it can. If we're not careful, we can be more less open-minded or more critical, or just have an edge if there's an issue in our personal life that's not fully addressed or fully resolved. And then now we're talking about a business thing. If we're not careful, it could totally impact it.
Yeah.
The rule that we suggest for teams is that they want to have what we call like the TSA rule. So TSA has a phrase, and you probably know it. If you see something, do you know the rest of the phrases?
I probably should, for as much as I travel, and that just tells you how much I ignore what they have to say.
Yeah, everyone ignores it. Their phrase is, if you see something, say something. And it's the same thing on a team or in a healthy organization. If you see something, feel something, or hear something, and it's like, I think we need to talk about that, the healthy teams just go for it. They just bring it out. And of course, your tone matters, how you say it, say in a respectful way, all that stuff matters. But those healthy teams, they're not afraid of it, and they lean into it. And here's the last thing, and because we have other topics to talk about too, but the last thing I'll say on this that can be really helpful is sometimes teams struggle with, when it comes to conflict, understanding two words: the difference between being nice and kind.
Yes.
How would you, if I had to put you on the spot, Christy, how would you define the difference between these two words?
So it's really funny. I have one of my close friends always tells me, she's like, you're kind, but you're not always nice, is what she'll tell me. And she's like, and I think that's good. And one of my other friends, he'll say the same thing. He's like, you're always very kind, but you don't always show up as nice. Yeah. But they respect that, because you're being kind because it's coming from a heart, but not showing up nicely might be having that hard conversation, saying something that is not nice in their eyes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. You have people that are saying that to you. So being kind in
the beginning, because I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I realized now that we're good.
Yeah. The way we like to describe it as being kind is it means you care enough about the person, the team, or the organization to speak the kind truth in real time. So not 6 months from now, but in real time. Like a good example, hey, your presentation was really strong. It was really great. But that last 5 minutes, it really felt like you were kind of winging it. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you had that part practiced and rehearsed, but it just kind of came across like you were winging it. But is that right? And they go, yeah. And it just means you lean into that. You're not afraid to like speak the kind truth in real time. Again, because you care enough about the person or the individual or the team or the organization to say what really needs to be said. Most teams are not having enough conflict. And so one of the ways you can do it, one of the tips is in a meeting, if someone's being really quiet, you just ask them, hey, Christy, you haven't said anything yet. You have really good ideas. What are you thinking right now? What's on your mind right now? You're just mining for conflict. You're just seeing like, do I need to pull it out of someone? Is their silence a sign that they're not on board or they're not bought in? The other one too that can really help teams is as soon as your team starts to debate, have like a passionate debate around an idea, someone needs to stop and say, hey, this is great. I'm so glad we're doing this. This is going to make us better as an organization that we're doing this. So someone has to just affirm it in real time. That can be really helpful for teams.
Well, and it's always fun being the person that calls people. I've done that in a lot of group settings. I'm like, hey, you haven't added much to the conversation. You usually have great ideas. And you just see this look of horror come over their face sometimes of like, oh gosh, I'm not prepared for this. Or
Sure.
Yeah, or you have people that are, I'm having an off day, and if I say what I want to say, it's going to come off not the right way. I've had people tell me that too, and they're like, I would rather keep quiet this round and then come back to you later when I've sorted out a few things, which I highly respect too.
Yeah, that's a great thing for someone to say, like, hey, I'm not sure all my thoughts are going to add value. They might be really critical right now, so let me think on that a little bit more. That's better than no, like I'm not doing that.
Or somebody being like, let me tell you what I really think, and this is stored up anger for the last 2 weeks of whatever the project
is. Sure. Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah, that can happen on teams like where, they're not addressing enough. They haven't built enough trust. And so they submarine each other in the meeting all of a sudden where like now it becomes really personal. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So teams that do this well, they lean into the conflict. They push themselves. And the other thing too that they do, and this is some of the work that I do when I meet with teams, is we talk through, well, what are the new conflict norms or rules that would be good for this team to establish? So example, we're going to push ourselves to talk more in the meetings. Because oftentimes people will say, you know what, I don't share my thoughts enough. I need to challenge myself to speak up more in the meeting. Or sometimes people will say, like, I want to make sure, like, if I have a different idea, if someone gives a different idea, I'm not always going to push back. I'm going to listen. I mean, they might have all sorts of new norms. It could be like our conflict rules, like what's said here stays here. So like if we have a meeting, I'm not going to tell everyone else later, oh, well, Chrissy said this in the meeting. Can you believe that? So it's really helpful for teams to go, what would be good for us? What would be the new rules or norms that would allow us to have better discussions that would lead to better decisions? And sometimes if teams, as silly as that sounds, take 15 minutes to talk about that, all of a sudden their staff meetings are a lot better, a lot more effective.
And I've seen that even with large organizations, companies I've worked at in the past, there's this niceties where they're nice to your face. They stab you in the back on the way out of the meeting.
Yeah.
I even told a client that one time and they were not happy, but I'm like, you asked what I really, really thought with no filter. Here's what it is.
Yeah, well, you nailed it. A lot of times, we'll talk to leaders and some leaders are just fully honest. Yeah, I definitely think we could, work in some areas. And sometimes like leaders will go like, oh no, we're great. Everything's fine. But if you ask more questions, the team will all admit there are a lot of meetings after the meetings.
Yes.
And it's okay. It's normal to some degree, but healthy organizations avoid that at all costs. Because a lot of times there's another meeting right after the meeting, and that's in someone else's office, or it's down the hall, or it's in the parking lot, later at the end of the day, or it's on the phone on the drive back. In healthy organizations, if they have a different thought or opinion, they just say it in the meeting. They don't need to have all these extra meetings. And but that can happen a lot on teams that are afraid of conflict or don't have enough trust that's been built up.
Yeah.
So the next behavior is, if you have that trust, and then if you have conflict, healthy conflict, it then allows you to have what I would call active commitment. That's the next layer up. And this is kind of like a triangle. So that's why I'm going out. But if you don't have like healthy conflict, then it's going to be really hard for the team to be actively committed to something, because they're not often getting their full thoughts or ideas out on the table. Now, the other thing that's really important to establish is, however decisions are made in that small business or that organization, it's fine. If the leader decides, or if it's sometimes it's a vote decision, or if the leader says, hey, Christy, you go research it, come back next week and tell us what you think would be best for this decision. However that decision is made, what commitment looks like is nobody's going to get thrown under the bus later for that decision or for what was said in that meeting. So you have a healthy debate or conflict about what's best for the organization. You commit to it. But again, no one's going to say, can you believe that Matt said we should go this direction? No, nobody gets thrown under the bus later. If you don't think it's a good idea, you need to say it in the meeting and not say it outside the meeting later. Healthy organizations, they don't, that's not cool. They're like, no, you should have said that back in the meeting. And that decision was made 3 months ago. This is not the time to now, throw people under the bus. Now that might, the idea of the decision might crash and burn, and that's okay. Then you come back as a team and you figure out, why didn't that work? You have a healthy discussion about it, even maybe a debate, maybe even a passionate debate, and you make a new decision, a new commitment, and then you move forward. But all of this sort of like kind of throwing each other under the bus, or that kind of stuff, you can't do that. And here's why this matters, is because sometimes the team will have a decision to make. And if they can't do conflict well, they'll come to a moment where they're voting or they're making a decision, and people might nod their heads, yes, we're in agreement, but they're not in agreement. They're just nodding their head because the leader wants to do it, but they've got to have that healthy conflict, because they'll nod their heads, yeah, it's a great idea, but inside they're thinking, I don't think it's going to work. I'm not fully bought in, and I'm not going to give it my best effort. Yeah. And then it's not a shock a few months later when it doesn't work, and the leader's like, what happened? How come this didn't work? And if someone says, well, I didn't really think it was going to work, it's like, no, you should have said that in the meeting. But again, the leader also has to kind of have a pulse. If they don't think everyone's bought in, they got to lean into that. They got to figure out, why is that? They got to get that clarity. Why am I sensing that we're not fully bought in, that we're not as excited about this as I am? What is that about? The leader has to figure that out.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy to do, to read the room and figure out, wait, my team's not fully on board. That's not easy all the time to figure that out.
No. And I think people, they can hide really well to,
Yep.
pretend to be enthusiastic about a direction they're going, just to like get through the meeting and move on to what they have next for that day with that limited buy-in. Or, I mean, I've even been part of projects and things where I'm not fully bought in. I'm bought in enough where I'm like, all right, let's evaluate this, but I don't think that this will be successful.
Yeah.
But I want to be proven wrong. Yep.
So a phrase that can be really helpful, and this is a phrase that I think it was Intel. I could be wrong on it, but they had a phrase called disagree and commit. That was their phrase. Like, if you go in a meeting and you're not sure, that was their phrase. Hey, we're going to disagree, but before we leave this meeting, we're going to commit to something. And another phrase that can be really helpful is, when people get to weigh in, they often will buy in.
Yes.
So let's say you're presenting something and I've got some hesitations about it. As long as you allow me to say, hey, Christy, can you share more your rationale of why you came to that decision, or why you think that's the direction we should go? Or if you're allowing me to ask more questions, even push back a little bit. Hey, here's my hesitation, or here's my concern. Oftentimes people will buy in later, as long as they get to weigh in. Very few people on the planet are such where like they go, well, it wasn't my idea, so I'm not on board now. Very few people are like that. Most people, as long as they get to weigh in, they will buy in.
And I've seen that a lot with really large projects that I've done. Like, let's say you're moving from QuickBooks and you're going to a humongous, piece of software like the ERP. It's a multi-million-dollar deal. You as an employee and end user, you want to know how it's going to affect your job. You want to be able to have some say. And when I've worked with organizations where the executives are making all of the decisions and they don't want anybody else to weigh in, a lot of times those implementations fail because everybody is, well, you didn't ask us, and this doesn't do X, Y, Z for us. It makes our work harder, versus the ones that want their subject matter experts to come into the room and say, hey, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, ask all of the questions. We want this to be a team effort to see what's going to make us all successful.
Yep. No, that's so true.
Yeah.
So the reason why all these build on each other, that foundation is trust. And then if you have trust, you can have healthy conflict. And if you have healthy conflict, then you can get real active commitment. Okay. It's not passive. It's not like people just nodding their heads, but you have real commitment on your team. And the reason why these are all important, and especially in this order, is because the next one is accountability. So if you don't have commitment around how you're going to operate or how you're going to behave on your team, then it's nearly impossible to really have good accountability in your organization or in your small business. And a lot of times when we think about accountability, we think about it in the sense of performance. And every small business has people that have to perform and do their job well. But what comes before performance are behaviors. So the phrase we say is behaviors precede performance. And so the best teams, the best organizations are able to have very candid conversations about behaviors that are helping and then behaviors that are not helping. And the easiest example to illustrate how behaviors precede performance is usually with athletes. So when an athlete is struggling, it's more often than not related to a behavior. Like they're not getting enough sleep the night before a game. They didn't take the off season very seriously. They didn't study the playbook. They're not working on a skill set that they've got to get better at, and so it's usually related to behavior. So again, healthy teams, healthy organizations are able to have very candid conversations about, hey, here are the behaviors that are helping us, and here are the behaviors that are not helping us. And what's really surprising is a lot of times when we think about accountability, we always go, well, the leader has to hold everyone accountable. So let's say you're the leader, Christy. Most teams, if you're not careful, they'll kind of go, well, Christy, when are you going to tell so-and-so that he's not doing his job very well? And of course, the leader has to be willing to do that. They have to be willing to address the difficult issues. But what often gets overlooked is that the peer-to-peer accountability is often just as effective, if not more effective, than the leader trying to hold everyone accountable. And so the key to this is, if you as the leader are willing to hold people accountable occasionally, then I am way more likely to hold other people on my team accountable when appropriate. If I know that you would get my back, if you found out that I had that difficult conversation with someone else, if I know that you wouldn't get my back, and I don't know if I'm pointing the right way on the screen. You're on this side of me.
I'm on that. Yeah, you're
good. But if I know you'd get my back, then I'm way more likely to have the awkward conversation with someone else about accountability. But if the leader won't do it, it's very hard for the organization to hold each other accountable when appropriate. And I'll give an example. This is a great exercise to do. It's called the team effectiveness exercise. And this is the most powerful exercise that we do when we work with teams. Is we have everyone in the room get a chance to share for everyone else on the team what's a behavior that they do that helps the team. So it's a behavior or characteristic. So it's not a skill set like, Christy, you make great Excel spreadsheets. It can't be that. It has to be a behavior or characteristic that you do that really helps. And then what's a behavior or characteristic that person does that they could work on that would help the team more. So let's say you're the leader, Christy. So we would have the leader go first. And this is always the scariest moment because everyone around the room is going to go around and share a behavior that you do that helps the team. And then what's a behavior you could work on that would help the team more. So first time around, be like, oh, Christy, you're so positive. You bring a lot of good energy. you're so encouraging, blah, blah, blah. You hear all these great things.
Yeah.
Then the other way around, when you go around the room, that the one you need to work on could be all sorts of things like, oh, like, sometimes when you get stressed, you bring that stress and the whole team can feel it. And so, and whatever it may be like, it could be like, you know what, sometimes they're giving you feedback and you get really defensive, whatever it is. But here, and that can be really scary, especially when the leader goes first, especially when the leader, everyone's afraid, like, ooh, what can I really be honest, right? And but what's so powerful about that? After everyone goes, we just tell them, hey, take a deep breath. Everyone's like, and everyone laughs, right? Because it's a little scary. But what hardly ever happens is that leader hardly ever hears anything that they've never heard before.
Mm-hmm.
They usually have heard it from their spouse, or they've heard it from their best friend, or they worked somewhere else where they heard that. Rarely do they ever hear something that they've never heard before. And what's so powerful about that exercise, because everyone gets a chance to be in the hot seat, so to speak, is it's oftentimes the first time a team has actually been pretty candid with each other about behaviors or characteristics that don't add to a great work environment or are not helping the team.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times teams go, oh, no, we're honest with each other, but they're not as they think they are. They're not quite as honest. And so it's a great exercise, because for a lot of teams, it's like the first time they're like putting their like foot or their toe in the water when it really comes to accountability.
Yeah. I think so many companies, they don't do anything like that. I can't even tell you one job that I had before I went out on my own that was ever talked about, or that it was a priority. It's very odd, because if you want to be successful as a team and organization, that's something it should be a high priority to have in your organization.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many conversations that are not taking place on most teams that probably should be taking place. Yeah. And the leader has to model this. The leader has to create a dynamic where they're saying, hey, guys, we just finished like last quarter. Is there anything that I can be doing that would be helping this team more? And if the leader can establish that kind of culture where the leader models, hey, I'm open to your feedback. I know I'm not perfect. I know I got blind spots. I know that there's a bunch of things I could probably improve on. If the leader is willing to model that, that's also another form of vulnerability, is just being like, hey, I'm open to your feedback. If the leader can create that dynamic, then it's amazing how everyone else on the team can kind of go, oh, I should probably do that too. I should probably ask other people for feedback. And that really makes a big difference if the leader is willing to set that as an example.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah, there's a trickle down effect like everything else, and people want to follow that and be on board with it.
Yeah. Let me say one more thing too, is that sometimes we fool each other as individuals or as leaders when it comes to the topic of accountability. So here's what can happen. We don't share the full weight of our thoughts with people, and we fool ourselves by saying, well, I want to be kind or nice, and it's my being nice or loving that's keeping me from, saying that. Or I don't want to be perceived like I'm critical, or I'm micromanaging them, or that I don't appreciate the good things that they bring. When in reality, if we just took a little bit of a deeper look, what's often underneath that is it's a little bit of fear, a little bit of fear of, ooh, I might say something that they may not receive well, and that makes me feel really uncomfortable, and that's keeping us from saying the thing that we probably need to be saying on our teams. It's a little bit of fear, or it could be people pleasing, which I have plenty of in me, or it could be a fear of conflict, or what if they just don't respond well, and now it gets worse. Like, oh, never said it.
That's like the thing I hate.
And it's keeping us from saying what needs to be said. The other thing too that's important on this topic is, if we know something that's going on our team, let's say it's a coworker, let's say you observe something in me that's not helping the team, or it's not helping my career development, or whatever it may be, and you never share it with me, Christy. But we've worked together for years, and but if you never share it with me, And let's say I get fired one day. Yeah, it was great that we got lunch a bunch of times and we had fun at like the company, get-togethers and outings and the Christmas parties. But if you knew the whole time there was something that I probably needed to hear that would help me, and I get let go or whatever it may be, you weren't being that loving to not mention it to me.
Well, it's such a disservice to you and for both parties in a lot of ways of, hey, not being bold enough to share something that's important, but because fear got in the way. And now this other person has to take the kind of the brunt of that because maybe it was something that would have helped them stay on if they had just known.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, it's like the 3 seconds of courage that it would take to start that conversation is often the biggest moment. Can you even start it? And of course, your tone, how you say it, how humble you are in it, how you can admit too that you've got blind spots and you got things you need to work on. Of course, all those things matter. But yeah, the 3 seconds of courage is often what's really needed to have that conversation. Yeah. And so the last behavior is results. And that's kind of like almost self-explanatory, but sometimes in organizations, especially for the leader has to model that the results really matter. And sometimes people hear this and they go, well, duh, of course. But sometimes what can happen on teams is if you're not careful, what can happen is like, oh, well, this company is so great. We've arrived, or I got the position I wanted. And so results don't matter as much now. And so there's a lot of ways that you can fight, you can kind of push against that if that culture is there. But the most important part when it comes to results is that the leader has to demonstrate that the results really matter. Because if the leader doesn't really embody that, the rest of the organization, they'll feel it, they'll notice it, and it creates a totally different culture. So results, of course, the leader has to show they matter. But what can sometimes happen is if the leader focuses on that too much, then all of a sudden, all these other things we just talked about can get pushed aside. Like there's still got to be vulnerability-based trust. We still got to figure out how to do conflict in a healthy way. Like it's not just because results matter so much that all of a sudden now we don't care about anything else. But the leader has to model that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because you see things go sideways and all that laziness creeps in. If they're like, oh, we hit that milestone that we wanted, it's good enough for now, I don't really care about doing more. And then your team is left to think, okay, well, what's going on now? Because we were so quickly running towards this goal over here, and now nobody really cares anymore. Why does any of the work that I do matter?
Yep. And so usually when I'm working with a team or a leader, I'll go through what we just talked about, these 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. These are also in a book that Patrick Lencioni wrote called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So if anyone's listening and
great read.
Great book. Usually when we explain this to a leader or a team, we'll say, hey, which are the ones that you think your team probably needs to work on the most? And there's even an assessment that the Table Group has that anyone could do online with their team. But when we just ask it like just, hey, in the moment, which ones? Sometimes there's a wide variety of responses given, but more often than not, Christy, if you had to guess, what are the 2 behaviors that most teams would say, these are the ones we need to work on?
I would say the healthy conflict is always the main thing because nobody knows how to have that anymore at all. And then I would say, trust maybe. Is it
that one's mentioned a lot too, but you know which one that's mentioned more than that is accountability.
Okay.
And there's a good reason for that. Most people don't wake up in the morning and they go, I can't wait to tell Christy all the things that she's doing that's driving me nuts at work or driving the team nuts, right? Just how like nobody typically wakes up and goes, I can't wait to tell my neighbor my unfiltered thoughts about their front yard, right? Like most people are just not wired that way. And so it's okay. That's normal. But what healthy organizations, even small businesses are really good at doing is saying, okay, this might be an area that we need to improve on. So we're going to lean into it. We're not going to ignore it. And what can really help small businesses, big organizations, is going, okay, if this is a behavior that we need to work on, whether it's trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, or results, what are we going to do now? Like, it's one thing to say it, excuse me, but what are we going to do now moving forward? How can we get better at this behavior for the next, let's say, 3 or 4 months? What would be some real active next steps that we could take that would help us do conflict better or help us trust each other better? What would that look like?
Yeah.
And if teams are willing to have that conversation, a lot of times things actually feel like they're getting better, like a few months down the road. But if they don't have that conversation, nothing really changes.
That makes sense. Yeah, because I had a conversation with somebody about this the other day. You're creating movement, but there's no momentum. So you're just kind of, pedaling in place and not going anywhere.
Yeah. In fact, one of the best practices that I do when I work with a team is we'll put together like a playbook. So all these significant conversations, like what we're having and other ones, we'll actually like put on a piece of paper, hey, what's going to be different now as a result of this? And they just start talking about it as a team. We put this on a playbook, whether it's behaviors or conflict norms or like how do we behave as an organization, whatever it may be. That's on this playbook. And then we recommend they read it before all of their staff meetings. Not like you have to read out loud, not spend all this time, but just glance at it. Look at all these new commitments you made. Because if you don't do that, you'll have these great conversations, but nothing will change down the road. Oh, and I forgot to say one more thing too. When I gave the example of the team effectiveness exercise where everyone shares the behavior characteristic, after this, and this is gold, everybody has to share, hey, here's what I'm going to commit to working on. You said, and I always tell them like, hey, you got to keep it short and concise. You can't list like 10 things you're going to commit to working on. Just name like 1 or 2. And then they have to share after that, here's how this team can help me with that. So like, I would say for me, it's, hey, I know I need to work on not getting so defensive when I get maybe constructive feedback. I'm going to work on that. Well, how can the team help you? Well, the team can help me by, when you notice that when I'm starting to get a little defensive, just give me a friendly reminder. Hey, Matt, I think you might be doing it right now. And when you put that on the playbook, when you put, Matt, here's the thing you committed to. Here's how the team can help you. It's amazing how much can change in just a few short months when everybody is vulnerable enough to say, here's what they're committing to working on, and here's how this team can help me. It's amazing what a lot of bad habits start to get resolved because of that, and how there's more trust on the team because everybody's aware now, because it's more of a conversation. Everybody's aware that we've got blind spots, that nobody's acting like they have it all together. That exercise is so powerful. I like that. The other thing too is it's never a bad idea for teams that kind of have that conversation, like at least once or twice, maybe 3 times a year. Have that conversation. Don't make it just like the one time and then you never talk about it again. Like have that conversation. Hey, what is it that we can work on as a team? How can we improve? How can we improve as individuals? Like that should be just an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. No, I like that's really key to have. And I've seen that work very well. I was part of an organization years ago, and that was one little thing that they did do that part of it. For as dysfunctional as the company was, and it was really large, they did do that with our really small groups of maybe like 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
But it did make a lot of changes. Yeah. I know it helped me a lot.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff, it's easy to understand, but it's hard to do. And when I work with teams, I tell them, hey, there is nothing like red flag, all alarms. If you realize, man, we don't do conflict well, or we don't do accountability well, that just means you're human. That just means like you're normal. It's actually the teams that can be honest with each other. They have the most hope. It's the teams that sort of pretend that they don't have anything they need to work on. Those are the ones that and it could be that the team is really healthy. That could certainly be the case.
Yeah, that's true.
But most teams have stuff that they're not being that honest with each other about. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But the healthy organizations, they talk about it. They don't just keep putting it like sweeping under the rug. They have the conversation.
Yeah. No, it's good. There's a handful of questions that came in.
Yeah. Let's do those. Yeah.
to chat about those because I think you can really speak to those. So one of them is from, whoops, not this one, wrong comment. Let's try this in Kyler's. What is team cohesion and is it different for every team?
Well, those 5 behaviors are really the best way to describe like team cohesion. What could be different for every team, addressing that part of the question, is for some teams, certain behaviors might be the tipping point. Like, oh, we don't do conflict well, so we want to work on that. But to go deeper, it's because we may not trust each other that much. So it could look different for every team. Some teams might be doing trust and conflict well, but they're not doing accountability well. So it could look a little different for every team. Some teams, even when we do these assessment, they'll be green in a lot of areas and they might be red in one. And so it just kind of depends. Every team's a little different, but team cohesion is basically around trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. Yeah.
Cool. This is one from Avery. What are some early warning signs that a team is starting to downplay health before it shows up in metrics or missed opportunities?
That's a really good question. What's an early warning sign is when teams are not being vulnerable with each other in staff meetings or conversations, when they're not being honest, like, oh, I think I could have done better on that part, or I'm struggling, or I feel like I'm behind. I just want to admit it. Like I need some help, or when they're avoiding difficult conversations, that's usually a warning sign. Patrick tells this great story of a team where the leader reluctantly did a 360 review. And so all these results came back and the leader saw it. He goes, oh, this looks like you guys don't think I respond well to feedback. And like, is that true? And everyone's like, no, we think you're great. So anyway, that whole thing happened over and over again. And eventually someone spoke up and was like, actually, I do think you could be more approachable. Do you guys feel that way? And everyone's like, no, they completely threw him under the bus, right? Later on, this company, kind of had blew it. The whole company suffered. And New York Times said, well, it's because they made some strategic errors. And Patrick writes in one of his books, he's like, it had nothing to do with that. And it was all about the leader's inability to be vulnerable and receive feedback and to admit that they have things they need to work on. That was the bigger issue. And they may not have made some good decisions, but that was the bigger issue that needed to be addressed, and it never really got addressed. So that might be like early warning signs if the team can't be vulnerable with each other, or if they're avoiding conversations.
And then let's see, Avery had one other one too that was good. Do you think some leaders confuse alignment with agreement, and how does that misunderstanding hold teams back?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You don't always have to agree in a conversation or in a decision. Like, teams are usually made up of people that have different ways of processing things, different ways of thinking, different ways of looking at solutions, or that's okay. But whatever decision is made, they need to be all committed to it. So that's where that conflict piece comes in, where we can hopefully push back on ideas and get allow the best idea to get to the surface. But whatever decision is made, you need to commit to it. So you don't always have to agree, and that's okay. But you do need to be committed to whatever that decision is. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but sometimes organizations can get confused on, well, everyone has to be aligned on this, or everyone has to agree. Well, there does come a point where you go like, no, we're making our decision, we're moving forward. So it's not like we're voting for 100% agreement on things. That's not always going to happen.
And then Kyler had another one. Does the methodology work with organizations of all sizes, or is it different for larger, more complex companies?
Those 5 behaviors, they work with small teams, small organizations, and big ones. Now, the way to really kind of hone in on those is to look at it from your team's perspective, like the team that you're on. How are we doing these 5 behaviors? Sure, they can be true of bigger organizations, but the best way to look at those is within your team. Let's say we're on a team of 8. How are we doing with these 5 behaviors? And the reality is, as at the top level of an organization, the executives, the top executives, if they can't do those 5 behaviors well, the rest of the organization will feel it. It'll trickle down. There'll be silos, there'll be departments that'll kind of against each other. And it usually has to do with, at the top level, how well is that executive team operating in those 5 behaviors.
And then the last one was one more, because Avery always asks great questions. If you stripped away titles, processes, and strategies, how healthy would your team really be? And what's the first thing you'd change to close that gap?
If you stripped away titles, processes, and strategy. Well, like I said earlier, usually the foundation to being a healthy team is more about, can we be vulnerable? Because what can often happen in especially big organizations, if you have big titles or big resumes or big salaries, is they're not that vulnerable with each other. They're not willing to admit when they made a mistake, or they made a wrong hire, or they made a decision last quarter that didn't turn out that well. And so that really is the difference, is, can we be honest enough to say what really needs to be said? Can we be vulnerable with one another? And sometimes all the strategy and titles and processes are sometimes smoke screens to be talking about what really needs to be talked about in the meeting.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, thank you so much for today. This was fun. Great conversation. I hope everybody that watched it, or when you watch it in the days to come, gets a lot out of it. There's so much when it comes to building teams and understanding the idiosyncrasies of just people and how to be successful and to be open and not. I think the biggest thing that always stands out for me is not letting fear get in the way of what you need to do.
Yeah.
And that comes in so many shapes and sizes.
Yep. No, well said. Yeah. Yep. Well, I really enjoyed it. This was really fun.
Yeah. Thank